Part 1.
You will hear a woman calling an online fashion company. First, you have some time to look at questions 1 to 5. Listen carefully and answer questions 1 to 5.
Hello, this is the Watermelon website customer assistance line. How can I help you today? Hello, I bought a pair of shoes online, but they are the wrong size and I'd like to return them. Can I have your name, please? Yes, it's Jennifer William. That's William with no S? Thank you. Do you have an order number? Where do I find that? It's under your address at the top of the page. Oh, yes, the number in bold. It's ON. Oh, I suppose that stands for order number? 99800? So that was 99800, correct? Yes, when the shoes came, they were the size that I ordered, but they are just too small to get on my feet. What day were the shoes delivered? Last week sometime. I just hadn't had a chance to open the package. It's been sitting in my front hall since then. I think it was Wednesday that they arrived. No, it was Thursday. I remember because I only worked a half day that day. So, would you like to return them and cancel the order, or would you like to return this pair and order them in a larger size? If I order another size, will I have to pay for delivery again? No, it's included in the original shipment price of £7. Great, okay. I'll try the next size then. These were size 37 in black, so can you send me the same pair in a 38? What was the name of the model of the shoes? They are called Molly, M-O-L-L-Y. They are flat-heeled ankle shoes with a zip on the side. Oh yes, they are lovely. I have a pair myself. They are so comfortable. Unfortunately, we no longer have any in a 38 in black. I'm afraid you will have to order them in another colour. We still have them in green, navy, red and natural tan. Is the tan light or dark in colour? I don't want light tan shoes for the winter. They are quite light, I'm afraid. Perhaps... I'll take the navy ones then.
Before you listen to the rest of the conversation, you have some time to look at questions 6 to 10. Now listen and answer questions 6 to 10.
How do I get the other shoes back to Watermelon? Just pack them back in the box and put a new label on it with our address. You can see the return address at the bottom of the invoice. Write returned product clearly on the label. Can I give the box to the counter when the new boots are delivered? No, I'm afraid it doesn't work that way. You need to take the box to the post office and post it back to us. Send it COD and we will take care of the payment when it is delivered. Send it how? Write COD on the package. It stands for Collect on Delivery. It means the recipient pays for the postage. Okay, it still is rather a bother that I have to organise sending it back to you myself. How do I know that you won't charge me twice for the boots? I am sending you an email now with the order change. It shows that you will be refunded when the boots are returned to us. So for the moment, your credit card will show 2 separate payments, but the first one will be reimbursed. Can I just check your delivery address again? Actually, can I change the delivery address to where I work? I'll give you that address, but make sure you write reception on the delivery note. Then I can pick it up from there. Certainly, reception. What is the address? The company name is Jackson and Partners Accountants, and the address is 23 Beacon Street, Southport. The postcode is PR8 19Q. Can you spell the street name for me, please? Is it Bacon? No, it's Beacon. Beacon. Okay, thank you. While I have you here, the matching belt to these boots is currently on sale. It's in the same navy leather and the buckle is silver like the studs on the boots. It's rather nice. Would you be interested in adding it to your order? I'm afraid I never wear them, so even at a discount like that, it still wouldn't be worth it to me. All right, now I've just sent you the email about your change of order and address, and the boots will be dispatched today. You should receive them later this week. Thank you for calling Watermelon. Thank you and goodbye.
That is the end of part 1.
You now have half a minute to check your answers.
Now turns to part 2.
Part 2.
You will hear a journalist talking about a resort on a Pacific island called Longshark. First, you have some time to look at questions 11 to 15. Now listen carefully and answer questions 11 to 15.
On a tiny island in the middle of the Pacific Ocean is the Longshark Resort. The island itself is only a 7-kilometer walk around its cliffs and beaches and gets its name from the shark-like shape it has when seen from the air. Not that many people get to see it from the air, as access is only by boat from the Tahiti Islands, 3 hours away. It's not even on any maps. The upmarket resort has space for only 26 guests at a time, and they are required to stay for at least 2 weeks. The island is quite the secret and does absolutely no publicity to attract customers. Longshark is fully booked for a year in advance, purely through word of mouth. The Polynesian people of the island who run the resort refuse to do interviews, so the only information I have been able to get is from people who have actually stayed there, wondering what the great mystery of the island was. I put out word online that I was trying to find people who had been guests who could give me some information. The couple I finally tracked down had stayed there recently, but asked to remain anonymous as they want to return there. They were worried that they might be refused if word got out they were talking to a journalist about the island. So what is the big deal? There are hundreds of similar islands with fancy resorts across the Pacific. What makes this one so special? Well, according to the people I talked to, nothing really. Just the fact that it is so exclusive and secretive. Mark and Susie, not their real names, said that it was just wonderful to be completely cut off from the world.
Before you hear the rest of the conversation, you have some time to look at questions 16 to 20. Now listen and answer questions 16 to 20.
There is no Wi-Fi available at all, and not really any telephone signal, unless you use the satellite phone in the main office of the resort. And apparently, this is only allowed if there is a medical emergency. There is no television or newspapers and no radio. The resort is quite luxurious, with a top-class restaurant, breakfast delivered to rooms, and day spa facilities that are all included in the price of your stay. The island's boat goes to and from Tahiti every day for supplies, but guests are not allowed to do day trips. They can only use the boat to arrive and leave. Guests on the island are cared for in every way, but in complete isolation from the world. Susie told me she chatted with quite a few famous people, but after a few days, her interest in star spotting evaporated as she relaxed on the beach or went snorkeling in the bay. The bay is surrounded by a coral reef with a pod of dolphins that visit daily, no less, and swim with the guests. I was starting to see the charms of this place, but I still didn't completely get it. There must have been something else they weren't telling me. Susie said it was impossible to explain, and that perhaps the island wouldn't have had the same effect 20 years ago, but now it was rare to find anywhere on the planet that was completely cut off from everything. Both of them work in high finance, and their phones are never off when they are at home. Mark said the first couple of days he felt guilty that none of his clients were able to contact him, and he even made an attempt to use the phone in the main office, but they said no. He said he would never normally have booked to stay in a place for such a length of time, and added that he now understood why the hotel made people stay that long, because it had taken him quite a few days to shake off the world and completely relax. Susie said she understood that this probably wasn't the holiday for everyone. She wouldn't tell me how much it cost, but I can imagine it must have been extremely expensive, possibly 2 years' salary for an average person. I can't see myself ever being able to afford something like that, and the only similar thing I can imagine is being out in the middle of the desert or in a forest somewhere. I think Long Shark is different though, because it is the combination of safety, luxury, and isolation that makes it so popular with the lucky few who can manage to get a reservation.
That is the end of part 2.
You now have half a minute to check your answers.
Now turns to part 3.
Part 3.
You hear two students, Charlotte and Damien, telling their tutor about an architecture project they are doing for university. First, you have some time to look at questions 21 to 26. Now listen carefully and answer questions 21 to 26.
Well, Charlotte and Damien, what have you decided to do for your architectural project?
We are going to do a study of the first project that famous architect Wilson Prescott designed.
Wilson Prescott, who designed the Charleston Towers in New York and the University Library building here in Benchley, what was his first project? When he first graduated from the University of Manchester in 1972, he worked for a small firm of architects in Buckinghamshire and in 1973 was given the project of designing a private house for a local family called the Bartletts. So it's called Bartlett House. The house is still standing and is currently for sale for the first time since it was built.
Charlotte and I went to inspect it, and it's still in great shape with its original flooring, bathrooms, and kitchen. We wanted to get a photographic record of it for the university. That was the main reason we went there originally. We heard it was on the market, and we are quite sure that whoever the new owners are, they will completely refurbish it.
Isn't there a preservation order on it? There should be, of course, but no, there isn't. The real estate agent looked a bit concerned when we told him why we were there. A preservation order would make the property much more difficult to sell. People don't like buying houses that restrict them from making alterations. Just the historical value of the photographs is probably enough to base your paper on. What else did you have in mind?
We were quite amazed when we saw the house. The exterior is so much like the work he designed later in his career. He used the same long strip windows in Charleston Towers. In every part of the house, there are reminders of later work that he has done. Look at this photo. Do the columns holding up the extended roof here remind you of anything?
They are the same shape as the ones used in this building in Barcelona. And look, it's the same slate used to cover the bricks that he used on the walls of the university library 30 years later. This is very interesting. He must have only been in his early 20s at the time.
Before you hear the rest of the conversation, you have some time to look at questions 27 to 30. Now listen and answer questions 27 to 30.
And Charlotte has tracked down the original floor plans. She went to the local council chambers and went through the archives to find the original submission.
Good detective work, Charlotte. Of course, they are the original plans. There would have been modifications during the build. So what we have decided to do is make this project into a video presentation so we can visually compare the original house and plans with his later work. Can we do that on this course? Or can it only be a written project? As long as you have an acceptable amount of text and dialogue, certainly. If you submitted it in paper form, it would need to be highly illustrated anyway, so a video project is a good idea. Are you able to do it at a high technical standard? It would need to be quite sophisticated.
I have quite a lot of experience in editing digital moving images, and you don't really need much equipment to put it together. I have access to the software we need. So in a few hours, I could edit a 10-minute film with voiceover, text, and moving and still images.
It sounds like you are on top of this, but I'd like to see a preliminary version before you submit the project, just so I can be sure that you are on the right track. Say 2 weeks before the due date? I think we should be able to do that. Before that, I could give you a complete list of the contents to read as well. We don't want to do all this work and then be told it's not good enough. Have you thought about doing an interview with Wilson Prescott? He is semi-retired these days, but I know he still gives interviews.
We were considering that, but we have no idea how to get in contact with him. If we just call his firm as a couple of university students, the message might not even get passed on to him.
Let me speak to the Dean of Architecture. I know he knows him quite well. He might be able to get in contact with him for you. Let me just take a note of that. I'll let you know how I get on at next week's tutorial.
That is the end of part 3.
You now have half a minute to check your answers.
Now turns to part 4.
Part 4.
You will hear a part of a lecture about the history of printing. First, you have some time to look at questions 31 to 34. Now listen carefully and answer questions 31 to 34.
The history of printing is usually said to have begun in Europe in the 15th century. But there was a lot of printing going on well before then, mainly in Asia. Almost 600 years before that, Chinese monks were using a process called woodblock printing, where carved wooden blocks are coated with ink and pressed into paper. The earliest book that still exists from this time is the Diamond Sutra, printed in 868 AD, which was discovered in 1900 and is now in the British Library in London. This technique of printing also spread to Korea and Japan, where both wooden and metal blocks were used to produce Buddhist and Taoist scripts. In about 1040, a Chinese peasant called Bi Sheng came up with the idea of movable type. Little is known of Sheng himself due to his humble origins, but his method of printing, which involved the creation of hundreds of small individual pieces of type made of baked clay, was recorded by a scholar and scientist called Shen Kuo, who lived at the same time. This method survived by occasionally being used in some parts of China during the 12th and 13th centuries because of Shen Kuo's writings, but it wasn't in mainstream use in China or in other countries until centuries later. In any case, though there are written mentions of this technique being used, no early examples of the printed result, or even the ceramic printing characters, have survived. 200 years later, an official in the Chinese court, Wang Zhen, came up with the same idea, but this time the pieces were made of wood. Sometime later, Koreans started casting metal characters. However, block printing remained the dominant form, probably due to the nature of the East Asian languages, which do not have phonetic letters, but require a different pictogram character for every single word. So instead of less than 30 characters, as in European languages, thousands of pieces were required for Chinese. It was not until the idea hit Europe in the 15th century that printing with movable type really took off.
Before you hear the rest of the lecture, you have some time to look at questions 35 to 40. Now listen and answer questions 35 to 40.
In Europe, books were still either being handwritten or using some form of the woodblock technique, both of which were very labor-intensive. This resulted in books being highly expensive and only available to the elite. Johannes Gutenberg was a German goldsmith and craftsman who began experimenting with improvements in printing in the middle of the 15th century and is credited with the invention of movable type. The fact that Gutenberg was able to create such an impressive new technology completely independently does have some scholars scratching their heads. Gutenberg left no written record of how he came up with his ideas. At the time, there were active trade routes along the Silk Road to Europe, and it is not outside the realms of possibility that some or all of the idea of movable type could have been passed on to him from the East. Whatever the case, he was certainly the first in Europe to cast the individual upper and lowercase letters required to print. And he also invented a new ink using linseed oil, which was a major improvement on the water-based inks used in the past. However, it was the wooden printing press itself which was the major breakthrough and truly original. He used components and systems found in winemaking and paper-making presses to create a mechanized process to put ink onto paper. This meant books could be mass-produced. Mass production not only sped up the process of printing, but reduced its costs enormously. Texts were no longer restricted to religious tracts and the publishing of government materials. Scientific discoveries, philosophy, history, and all forms of literature, including works of satire and sedition, exploded around Europe to an extent never witnessed before. The invention of the printing press changed the whole social and economic landscape in Europe. It was one of the major influences on the Renaissance and the Reformation, fueled social and political change in many countries, and published advances in science which led to the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. The closest comparison we could use to illustrate its effects would be the influence of the Internet today.
That is the end of part 4.
You now have half a minute to check your answers.